Why you should never give your resume to people in your network and what you should give them instead. I'm Greg. I'm the Introverted Networker. And in this episode, I want to talk about an interaction I had recently. I was giving a presentation to a group of college students, and I was talking about connecting with people and giving people your target company list and how to have conversations and how to be easy to help. All those things I normally talk about. And at the end, when the students raised their hand and said, you said you should never give your resume to somebody in your network. Why not? Why wouldn't you? Why not take the chance? Why not just give it to them and say, hey, here it is. Help me if you can. My answer was probably not my favorite. Reflecting on it, I said, that's a hard ask. It's hard to give your resume to somebody. And by being hard, I don't mean it's hard for you to give it to them. It's easy for you. It's hard for the other person to do anything with it. And because it's hard for them to do anything with it, they're not likely to do anything for you. And because the class was almost over and it was a Q&A session, I couldn't really go into the details of why giving your resume to your network is not the right thing to do and why you should use a target company list instead. That's why I wanted to get into it in a little more detail, because it's something I feel like people don't really think about when they're starting to network. They're trained to think that's what you do. You give people your resume, and if everybody has your resume, they're going to find a way to hire you. And the reality is that's not going to happen. You certainly can. And so the caveat I gave to this student was, you certainly can. I'm not telling you it's prohibited. It's not illegal. And I also said, my way of networking is one way. It's not the only way. It's the way that works for me, and it's the way that works for a lot of people that follow it, but it's not the only way. So by all means, if you want to give your resume to people, please go ahead. My point is, you are taking a connection that you have in your network that you've worked hard to create, the connection, the person, you've worked hard on the relationship, the conversation. And if you spend all this time fostering this connection, this relationship, and then you give them something hard to do, like take your resume and find somebody to give it to, it's kind of a waste of the connection. There's better ways to leverage that connection into growing your connection, into growing your network. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the whole process, and I talk about my 5 steps for networking, the first one is you start with someone you know. And this is probably somebody you've worked with in the past. It's our dormant ties, or a connection you've had over the years you just haven't talked to, and you got back in touch with them. So you spent enough time getting back in touch with them, and you connected online, and you had a conversation on the phone or video call, and you started really getting into that conversation. You asked them about themselves, and they told you what was going on, and you thought about a way to help them. And then after you helped them, they turned around and said, how can I help you? You've done a lot of work to get to the point where you can do something to grow your network and get closer to an opportunity, or you can put all the burden on that other person to go help you out. What's the difference, right? And this is what I didn't have time to explain. I tried to explain that if somebody hands me a resume, and even if I really want to help them, because let's face it, I want to help people. I want to help them find whatever opportunity it is they're looking for. If you hand me your resume, I've got to then look at it and decide who in my network I'm going to give it to. And I don't really know who you want me to give it to. You're just telling me, here's my resume. Now, if you say, here's your resume, can you give it to somebody at your company? Okay, you've narrowed it down, but depending on the size of the company you work at, there could be hundreds of people at the company, there could be thousands, there could be tens of thousands, there could be hundreds of thousands of people at the company. And they might expect that they imply that you're going to give it to somebody in recruiting. Because I've had people do that before, and I've had people give me their resume and they've said, give this to somebody in recruiting that's hiring for this type of job. And in their mind, they're thinking, that's really specific, Greg. I told you what department, what kind of jobs, if you can hand it to somebody, that would be great. And I can understand how, from your point of view, that sounds really easy. And anybody that's listening to this and who's been in the situation where they got the resume, you probably can sympathize with this, because this is what happens to me. Whether this was pre-pandemic or now post-pandemic, somebody hands me a resume, a physical paper copy of the resume, and says, "Can you give this to somebody?" I take it with me, and then it'll sit on my desk. And whether it's literally on my desk or in my inbox, it's sitting there. And it's staring me in the face saying, figure out who to give this to. And again, I don't know. Okay, so let's say I go to recruiting. There's typically more than one recruiter, and they recruit on different positions. So now I got to go to recruiting, and I'm not in recruiting, so most people aren't at a company. I got to go find out from recruiting who's doing what on what position, and then I got to give them a resume. And the recruiter is going to look at this and be like, well, what position is this for? Well, I don't know what position it's for. The person just gave it to me and said they want to work in this kind of job title, and here you go. So if I've done that, I kind of got it off my desk, but I didn't really help you out, because that recruiter could just put it on their desk, or that recruiter could look at it and toss it, or that recruiter could look at it and say, I'm going to get to it and never get to it. If you're going to be out networking, and if you're going to be making connections, and if you're going to be doing all the work to get to the point where somebody wants to try to help you, you have got to make it so easy for them to help you that they can't possibly say no. And the resume situation I just described is really hard for people to help you, and it makes it really easy for them to say no. Whether they say it to you directly or whether they never do anything about it and you never hear back again. So if you're doing all the work to get to that point where you're in that moment where that person's willing to help you expand your network, you want to make it as valuable a connection or an effort or an outcome as you can possibly get. Let's say you're looking for a job. Really what you want to do when you're talking to that person in your network is get one person closer to the person who's making the decision about the job. So instead of saying, here's my resume, go find somebody, you want to say, here's the person at this company who I want to connect with. Can you connect me with them? Now, your connection may or may not be able to do that. Your connection may be able to say, well, I know one person at that company, so I can introduce you to that person. And they may send an email and copy you and say, hey, you should meet this person. They're interested in learning about your company. Would love it if you would help me out. And that person says, great. Now you've gotten one person close to the job. Now, maybe that person's not a recruiter. Maybe they're not the hiring manager, but you're talking to somebody at the company you want to work for. Now you do the same thing. You have the conversation. You talk about them. You find out how you can help them. They say, how can I help you? You say, I'm interested in this type of position. Now this person in the company might say, I can introduce you to that recruiter. I can introduce you to the person who's hiring. And then you get introduced to them. And now you're talking to the person who it really matters. But you've taken out a lot of that uncertainty of whether somebody's going to hand your resume to somebody or not. You've used your connections. You've used that goodwill that you've created, that good karma, that good networking karma to get closer and expand your network and get closer to the person who can actually affect the outcome, as opposed to handing a piece of paper that talks about you in bullet points and accomplishments to somebody who may or may not be able to give it to anybody. And when they give it to that person, the person can be like, I don't know who this is. And since I don't know them, I'm not really going to go the extra mile. That's why I tell people, don't give people your resume when you're talking to them and when it's in your network. Okay, if you're talking to a recruiter that says, send me your resume, yes, send them your resume. Okay, if you're talking to the hiring manager who says, I need your resume, give them your resume. Okay, don't take this as a thing of you've never got to send out your resume to anybody. But when you're networking and you're talking to your connections and you get to that point in the conversation where somebody says, how can I help you? Do not hand them your resume. Instead, get your target company list together, write it down, put it on a formal document that looks like a resume, kind of. It's got a heading with your name on it. It's got your contact info. It's got the list of companies you want to work for. Maybe they're arranged by industry. Maybe they're arranged by size. Maybe they're arranged by role. However you want to arrange it in a way that a person can look at it and go, I know somebody at this company. I can introduce you to them. That will make your networking way more effective. It will make it easier for the person who you're talking to help you. That person will feel better about helping you. They will put in more effort to help you because they know it's something that's easy to do, and they feel like they can help you get closer to the person that can make the decision. What if you hand it to them and they say, I don't know anybody at any of these companies? Just by seeing the companies, a lot of times their brain is going to be primed to think of companies that they do know. And I'll say, I don't know anybody on this list, but I do know somebody at this company and this company. Those companies aren't on your list, but could I introduce you? Yes, absolutely. You never know where that's going to go, because you could meet somebody at one of those companies that's maybe in the same industry that you've never thought of. And when you start talking to them, they go, oh, I do know somebody at one of your companies on your list because we're in the same industry. Then you get introduced to that person, and you're closer to where you want to be in terms of opportunity. But the target company list is probably the most underutilized document in the job search toolbox. Nobody does it. I can tell you, I tell people this all the time. When they connect with me and they say, it was great talking to you, and I say, well, what can I do for you? And they're like, well, I don't know. When I get my target company list together, I'll send it to you. Do you know how many people do that? Like 1 in 20 do that. I will say, and I will explicitly say to people, I said, the best thing you can do is come up with a list of companies, your target company list, put it in a document, send it to me, and I will take a look at it and see who I know at one of those companies. 1 in 20 maybe sends me that, follows up. If you're doing that, number one, you're going to stand out to your network. You're going to stand out to anybody you interact with when you're networking. And if you explain to them why you're doing it, and you explain to them you want to be easy to help, you want to make it easy for them to connect you with somebody, here's something to prime your brain so you can think of people, they're going to be like, wow, that's brilliant. Where'd you come up with that? I don't care if you say I was the one who told you or not. Just say, I just learned this along the way in my job search. Or if you're like, hey, I learned it from this guy who does a weekly podcast and newsletter and writes on LinkedIn every day. His name's the Introverted Networker. You should check him out. I would love that too. That'd be great. But it is completely underutilized. If you do it, you will set yourself apart. You will be more effective in connecting with people at this critical point in the networking conversation. That's my answer. That's the answer I wish I would have been able to give during this class, but I simply didn't have the time. I mean, this is going on 12 minutes of me talking about this, because you really have to explain why the resume is not going to work and why the target company list is better. I hope that helps you, gives you some direction on this, gives you some conviction in the target company list. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me, leave a comment on this episode. Subscribe to the newsletter, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm out here every day teaching introverts to be better networkers. Give it a shot, give it a try. Let me know how it goes. Go out there, meet some interesting people. And remember, always be connecting.